Today, we have a very special guest on our show, Alex Gladstein, the Chief Strategy Officer at the Human Rights Foundation. Alex, welcome to this Norwegian show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So glad you could be here. Do you have any connections to Norway?
Yes, I have been to Norway more times than I can count, probably upwards of 60 times since I started working on a project called the Oslo Freedom Forum in 2008. Coincidentally, right around the same time that Satoshi was creating Bitcoin, the world financial system was breaking, and we at the Human Rights Foundation were seeing an opening to put freedom on the world agenda by creating a conference for freedom fighters and activists to get together and hang out and trade ideas and notes that would be complementary to what happens in Davos, for example, where all the dictators get to hang out and trade notes with all the capitalists, right? So this was like seen as like an alternative venue for that. We just a few months after Satoshi launched the white paper, we launched the first Oslo Freedom Forum. It was May 2009. There were a lot of other parallels throughout the years. Julian Assange played a big role in Bitcoin history, arguably, giving that kind of first use case, right? Towards the end of 2010, when WikiLeaks's fintech was all sort of shut down. He also spoke at the Oslo Freedom Forum in 2010. I met him in person. We hosted him in Norway and Oslo, and it was very interesting. He gave a great talk that I'd recommend people watch. It's called The Whistleblower. It's on YouTube. It's very good. And from there, we just kept growing, and eventually, we started from an idea, and eventually, we had the Prime Minister opening our conference right before COVID hit. The last big event we did in Norway was in 2019, and the Prime Minister opened, and we had the CEO of Telenor, and I mean, we have backing from the government and the city of Oslo and a lot of corporations and people, and it's been a really amazing thing to be a part of. And obviously, we're just kind of it's a team effort, and really the biggest reason why the event has succeeded is because of people who care about human rights, who live in Norway, who attend the event, who read about the event, who write stories about the event in the media, and who fund the event and make it possible. And I'm just very grateful to all of you maybe listening who've heard of the Freedom Forum or attended it. It's because of you that it all worked out.
Sweet. Let's go into the Oslo Freedom Forum. What's your best memory from it?
Man, that's a good question. Well, I think it's funny. When we started it, our founder is Norwegian heritage, but he wasn't living in Norway. He's Norwegian, but he has a Norwegian citizenship. But his family came from Venezuela. His name's Thor Halvorsen, very Norwegian name. But the other half of his name is Leopoldo Mendoza.
Exactly.
So basically, his family at one point came from Norwegians who were involved in diplomacy and trade in Venezuela, and they ended up, I guess, settling there and marrying into a Venezuelan family, and that's where Thor comes from. He's actually the closest relative to Simon Bolivar, I believe, that's alive today, the sort of George Washington of Latin America. So he has a fascinating story, and his life and times have been heavily covered in the Norwegian media over the years, that's for sure. He's definitely been controversial, let's say, provocative, which has been a lot of fun to watch him as he's really pushed this project into existence, and just to be part of that has been interesting. But I remember in 2008, when there was no Freedom Forum, we actually just found a bunch of people that we thought we did research, and we found some people in Norway who we thought would be open to the idea of doing a freedom event, and we just faxed them. We used a fax machine, and we cold faxed like a whole bunch of people.
Cold faxing, never heard of that before.
Yeah, well, just like faxed our office, and one of these people got back to us and was like, one out of all these faxes we sent, and was like, I would love to meet you. and they met Thor and ended up being one of the key sponsors of the event. And it's just like, that was an interesting moment, that someone would take a chance on that. But we did the event in 2009. The original vision was to give a place for people like Elie Wiesel and Solzhenitsyn and Václav Havel to teach the new young people of our generation about totalitarianism and the threat of fascism and dictatorship, and discuss what we can do to fight back. Right, that was the idea, and it was supposed to be a one-off event. And again, we did it in Norway because of Thor's background. And generally speaking, at least since the Vikings, you guys have been pretty peaceful and human rights respecting. The violators have been the empires who've come in and, kind of screwed you up. And, you have this great history of May 17th and, being one of the earlier countries to kind of ingrain rights in a constitution, and Freedom Day and all this stuff. There's a lot of synergy with Norway. I mean, it's a very free and open country by a lot of standards, right? I think there's many more people that would rather live in Norway than Norwegians who would rather live somewhere else. So I think that it made sense, and we went there, we did it. It was a smaller event than it is today, and people were like, do it again. So we came back, we did it in 2010 to a much larger scale. Again, we had people like Julian Assange, Peter T. I mean, we had one session where we had Lech Walesa, who won the Nobel Prize for Solidarity movement in Poland. He was this opening speaker, and then Peter Thiel was in the session, and Julian Assange was in the session, and Kasia Jacqueline, who's like a LGBT activist from Uganda, was in the session. That was pretty memorable. That 2010 event was opened by a Uyghur who gave the keynote speech. Her name was Rabia Kadir, known as the Dragon. I think what the heck do they call her? Dragon fighter or something. Basically, she used to be one of the richest people in China, and she went into the Chinese parliament and testified against the treatment of Uyghurs, and then was thrown in prison, and they were like torturing her sons on either side of her, horrible stuff. She eventually made it out and escaped, and she was the speaker that year. And that was before anybody said anything about Uyghurs, like 10 years before. So we were ahead of the curve on that and a lot of other issues. And we're just trying to inform the public through this event about what's happening around the world. And we like to focus on places that the media doesn't talk about. We've had a lot of speakers from countries like Laos, for example, or countries like Swaziland, countries that Eritrea, places that like the media doesn't cover for whatever reason. We like to bring that to light. And over the years, we also tried to make an event that was like powerful. Like most human rights events are horrendously boring, and like they're in a room with it's like the lights are on and just someone's lecturing, and it's usually some old white person or whatever, and not like someone from the country that they're talking about, right? And that led a lot of people in Norway actually to like, I think, have these like favorable opinions of like places like Cuba and Venezuela at that time, because they didn't actually have firsthand experience, But I think this event played a role in some opinion changes over the years on those topics. And we ended up being able to make the event into like something that was cinematic. So today it's like you go in this thing, it has this we have music and art, and like it's incredibly powerful. We have a 100-foot screen, and it's like we take the topic of freedom and make it really entertaining and powerful. I mean, we've had standing ovations, we've had people crying, and it's cool, man. It's really fun. So yeah, this is the 14th year. We had to take a year off because of the pandemic, make it online. Jack Dorsey gave the keynote to that conference, which was pretty awesome. That was 2 years ago. This year we did it in Miami because we couldn't do it in Norway, sadly, because of just too many restrictions. It was awesome in Miami. We had some killer talks. We had an opening talk from a Nigerian DJ who's very famous, who talked about the protests down there.
Saw that.
We had Navalny's head of investigations give this incredible talk about, she was on the plane when he was poisoned, and so many great talks about all stuff all around the world. So the event has evolved over time. It's always had a focus on technology. Starting in 2013, we started to train and educate activists about how to use encrypted messaging, how to use VPNs. And then in 2017, we started to fold Bitcoin into the programming. And it grew and grew and grew a little bit by bit. And by now we have a full scale Bitcoin Academy as part of when you look at the conference program, it's like one of the tracks.
Yeah, I
So
just bought
yeah,
tickets to the venue
it's gonna be
because
great.
yeah, it seems really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, like I will. We will reveal the program in early March, but I'll just give you a sense. Like these were the speakers at that are Bitcoin related at our last two events. We had Elizabeth Stark, Jimmy Song, Jack Dorsey, Stefan Livera, Peter McCormick, Nick Carter, Matt Odell, Fode Diop, Roya Mapub, Farida Naburema. Like we had a really great roster of people there to meet activists and to tell stories and to, I mean, Miles Sutter, we had Ray Youssef, we had
The whole A team.
Aaron von Widram from Bitcoin Magazine, and then folks working on cool projects like Paul from Sphinx and all kinds of people working on Lightning stuff. So it's been good, and I promised to bring a really great group to Oslo in May, and we're going to be there for 4 days. Well, not 3 days, but people get in Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. It's going to be really fun. So I would definitely encourage anyone listening who lives in Norway, who's interested in Bitcoin or freedom. I mean, we try to make the day tickets very affordable. They're not that expensive, and that gives you access to everything, except for the evening program. We make the evening program very expensive so that you have to pony up to come to the dinners and cocktails and stuff. But that's the way. That's how we can sustain the event. So it ends up being 300-400 people, kind of like a big wedding size for the evening events, which is always really fun. And then the daytime it'll range, but I'll probably have anywhere from 800 to 1,000 people in the theater. It's just great because most, look, a lot of the people who attend aren't from Norway. They fly there. They make a big investment of their time and energy. They're very present when they're there for various reasons. They, their time zone is behind them. So like usually, for most of these folks or ahead of them or whatever. So when they're morning, afternoon in Norway, no one's emailing them or calling them or anything. They're like free, right? And then they don't really know anyone in Oslo, right? So there's nothing to, it's not like having an event in New York or Paris or Miami. I mean, they don't know, they're not going out to parties and stuff. They're with us the whole time, mentally and physically. And then it doesn't get dark out. So it's like we end dinner at like 10 and it's everybody's like, where are we going next? So there's this really vibrant, fun after party element to it that's been legendary, in my opinion, over the years. So, and that will continue. So yeah, I mean, tickets are what they are. And look, if there's a student listening who can't afford the day ticket, just write to me and we'll get you in, alex@href.org. We'll figure it out. But yeah, it's been great. And over the years, again, we've had involvement from corporations and government, and it's been really bipartisan effort. I mean, we had Erna Solberg, the prime minister, speak a few years ago, and Ina, the previous foreign minister, she spoke. And at the same time, previous governments, we had, the current environment minister. He used to be the foreign minister back in 2013, and he was very excited about what we're doing. And so we've had Labour Party, we've had conservatives, we've had people from SV even supporting us. The current prime minister of Norway said that our event was like basically a rich part of the mosaic of human rights, and he's a big fan. So we're there with full support from across the political spectrum, and we intend to be there and to keep building this thing. So I hope you all can come. It's really, really fun.
Definitely.
And
we are coming, and I think some Bitcoin plebs from Norway are
and my
coming,
favorite, I mean, as far as the moment, I mean, it's the ripple effects from the event are really what is sensational. Like, I mean, just to watch, I mean, some of the speakers we had over the years became global stars as a result of being there. Like Yeonmi Park is a North Korean defector dissident who kind of gave one of her first big speeches at our event, and we helped introduce her to like book agents and stuff. And now she's like, she went on Joe Rogan.
Yeah, I
and
heard.
she went on Jordan Peterson, and she went on Lex Friedman and all these things. And same thing with Manal Sharif, who's if you actually look, I have these two books here. This is Yeonmi's book. I highly recommend it. It's phenomenal. And she had me on her podcast to talk about Bitcoin in North Korea, which was really fun. It talks about the Oslo Freedom Forum in this book. And in this book, same thing. This is...
You got to state the titles because we got only listeners.
Right. So one is called In Order to Live, which is the story of Yeonmi Park escaping North Korea. I highly recommend it. The other one is Daring to Drive by Manal Sharif. This one tells the story of being a women activist in Saudi Arabia. Both of them were books that changed the world in many ways that came out of the Oslo Freedom Forum. So those are just some examples.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Fascinating how sending out a few faxes like in 2008 have resulted in all
it
of
was
this.
a decade of hustle. Let's put it that way. We worked,
Yeah.
we worked very hard,
So-
and we learned a lot about Norway. I mean, it was interesting to me to learn about, especially how like the media, like different parts of Norwegian society read different media. And that was like very interesting to me. Like, you were reaching a very different audience if you were in like Dagens Næringsliv versus like Morgenbladet or whatever. So we had to figure that out. That took a while. Just sort of thinking about the different, there's like almost like a diplomatic political media complex, right? Of like people who hang out together, who are in the government and in the media and academia kind of. And then there's like the corporate world, which almost doesn't interact with them at all. And then there's like the like 1% who like doing their own thing, and they're not these three like pillars of society are sometimes not very interactive with each other.
I checked out your LinkedIn profile.
Yes.
And you stayed 14 years and 9 months in your current job. That's impressive as hell.
Yeah.
How did you become interested in human rights?
I'm 36. So I'm a child of like two main events that shaped my worldview, 9/11 and the war in Iraq. These things were like very formative for me when I was a teenager. And I got very interested in why did we invade Iraq? What the hell was that all about? And I studied political science and international relations in college as a result. And I've now learned a lot more. I've learned more studying Bitcoin about that stuff than I ever did in college. But it was a good like jumpstart for my career. I ended up getting an internship at the Human Rights Foundation, basically like a year after it got started. And at the time, it was the financial crisis, so like there weren't that many jobs. It was tough, but I got one, and I was started full time in 2008, and was thrilled. And I worked on Cuba stuff. I worked on helping smuggle things like V for Vendetta dubbed into Spanish into Cuba. It was like awesome, really fun job. And then I started working a lot on our North Korea program, on our Oslo Freedom Forum program. We have a lot of different programs at the Human Rights Foundation beyond the Oslo Freedom Forum, but this is kind of like our flagship event, let's say. But I
shipped in memory drives to or flash drives.
Yeah,
to
I got to
North
go
Korea.
to North Korea. I got to go to Korea and go to the DMZ and float balloons full of
that's how you did it.
Carrying payloads of information into North Korea. And I personally have attached a GPS tracker to one of these things and watched it on my phone as it went over North Korea to Vladivostok. So I know that
the balloons.
Yeah. So we were like very interested in, do these work? Like the balloons basically are like these big, this is a historical thing. Like the West Germans used to float balloons to East Germany. There's a song about it.
Yeah.
99 red balloons. So, and then, the Koreans copied this. So both the North and South Korean, they were both dictatorships for a long time, and they were fighting info wars against each other. And they would do these balloon wars. I interviewed a North Korean defector whose job it was to shoot down the South Korean balloons coming over in the 90s when it was a government project. The government would send over stuff like sports stuff, porn, all kinds of crap to like just
Even
open
porn.
the mind. Yeah, all kinds of stuff. Unfortunately, after the Korean government did this thing called the Sunshine Policy, they changed their whole opinion about North Korea. They tried to be like brotherly now, which I think has been a disaster for human rights. But the point is that like they stopped doing the balloon stuff, so it was left to North Korean refugees basically to do it, and we've been supporting them. And we were like trying to judge the efficacy of this thing. We're like, wait, how does this seems a little far-fetched? Like, does it actually work? So I remember a friend of mine, we went to like REI, bought like a bunch of these GPS trackers, and we had hand warmers around the heat because it gets so cold in the air. We would wrap the hand warmer around the GPS tracker. And this is a costly endeavor. it's like $100 for one of these things, but you have this huge like weather balloon, which is like filled with gas, and it's floating up. And then it's attached to a garbage bag, essentially, with like leaflets, DVDs, money, like dollar bills, candy, food, whatever. And then when the wind is blowing the right way, and that's hard to ascertain because the wind at 1,000 feet is different from the wind at 5,000 feet. They go in different directions. So you need to so these people like map it out, and they pay attention to meteorology and stuff. But I've been on that border looking into North Korea, and I've floated this thing over, and I've watched it as it went. I can verify personally that it works.
Cool.
And the way it would be an acid timer. So like after like an hour or whatever, the bag would open, and then like the stuff would all drop
with acid. Cool.
Yeah. So I could tell you that stuff worked, but you know what? Like, we decided it was more efficient to support people working on the border with China. So that's kind of what we do now. Most of the flash drives with information and terabyte, like the hard drives and the smartphones and tablets that go in over the Chinese border through commerce and trade, and that way there's no like lost waste. It's just everything is highly desired, and that's how like a lot of this stuff gets in. So that's our Flash Drives for Freedom project, which I worked on quite a bit. Over the years, we've had a big North Korea focus, and in fact, a couple of years ago, we brought. I remember it was amazing having Tae Yong-ho in Oslo. He's the highest-ranking diplomat to ever escape from North Korea. He escaped in a dramatic movie like Hollywood-style thing in London. He was the deputy at the British embassy for the North Koreans have in London, and one day he just took his family and they just went to the South Korean embassy. And it's like this crazy thing was all in the news. And what was crazy is earlier in his career in the 90s, he was stationed in Scandinavia. So he was like talking about how he was walking the same streets, but with a different mind. Like when he was in Norway earlier in his career, he was brainwashed, and he was like a propagandist for the North Korean government. And he was walking around in Oslo trying to convince people that North Korea was great. Now he gets on stage at the Freedom Forum, and he's talking about how he like figured out that the world was a lie and all this stuff, and it was crazy. And someone tried to milkshake him. There's a lot of pro North Korean people in Oslo, bizarrely still, and it's a strange thing. And we were in the lobby of one milkshake? So milkshake is a thing that came from the internet where like if you don't like somebody, you throw a milkshake at them.
Yeah.
So he was standing in the lobby of one of the hotels we use, and someone came up and like freaking milkshaked him. So I think that person got arrested, but the point is that we've had big time activists like when 2010 when we did the event, the president of Russia at the time, or the prime minister of Russia, this is when Putin was doing the musical chair thing. So this was Medvedev. So he was staying there at the same hotel as us. So we had all these like Chechens and all these activists. Kasparov was there. And it was so crazy. So there was like snipers on the roof, and Assange was there. It was really intense. So it's fun. So we seek to bring that level of drama every year. Yeah.
Yeah, there must be a lot of really powerful people who doesn't sort of like what you're doing. Have you met any resistance or any like sabotage?
Well, I mean, look, there are people in two areas of Norwegian, I would say, politics and society that don't like what we're doing. One would be on the corporate side, people that are doing business with China. They don't like what we're doing. And that's sad because obviously since the Liu Xiaobo thing was amazing. I mean, the Norwegians giving this prize to Liu Xiaobo, but then in the decade since, it's been like, total capitulation from the Norwegian business community. It's been so sad to see people that I know who I used to respect going to China, being excited about it, and like partnering with the Chinese on all this stuff. And it's like there's a genocide happening there, people. Like, come on.
So yeah, we are Bitcoin plebs. We obviously want to dive into Bitcoin as well today. Why do you think money is important when it comes to human rights?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't think it's explored enough. Every major event in history relates to money. I mean, you can just look back over the last 100 years. World War I was sort of waged in a way that was only possible because the money was changed from the gold standard to the fiat standard. World War II, one of the outcomes of that was our current dollar regime, right? In the 1970s, the US went off the gold standard for good as a result of the Vietnam War expenditures. In the 70s, as a result of trying to stabilize the dollar, finding people who would buy American debt, we did a deal with the Saudis that has forever colored energy markets in the world ever since. The opportunity to create a new global currency once the Soviets fell never materialized. There was never a second Bretton Woods. Instead, we entered the American hyperpower age, and that led to the what are known as the credit card wars. So those are the wars that I grew up with. Afghanistan and Iraq, all paid for by borrowing. No war bonds, no taxes. In fact, Bush cut taxes during the Iraq War. All of it was paid for by borrowing. So money has animated every big picture event, you know, in the, let's say, like European American history over the last 100 years, and globally too. I mean, you look at China, they were on the silver standard, and that didn't work out so well from the beginning about 100 years ago. They, you know, now are at the forefront of designing a new kind of money that will eliminate human rights from society, the central bank digital currency. So you can go anywhere in the world. 1.6 billion people today live under double or triple digit inflation, where the time and energy that they put into their work is being translated into a mechanism that loses value very, very rapidly, and is essentially stolen from them by the government in a brazen way. So, you know, money is tied to every major international event. It's just not talked about, especially in the human rights discourse. Like, we didn't have talks at the Oslo Freedom Forum for a long time, you know, until very recently, on like currency or like money or like payments. Like, it just wasn't seen as like part of it, which you realize is it's very, very deeply tied together.
Is it so that in countries that have huge inflation, the money ends in the leaders' pockets instead of going back into building infrastructure and to the people, so to say?
Yeah, I mean, mostly. I mean, that's the idea of the kanalen effect. When you have a sovereign that can mint its own money, the people who are closest to the money printer benefit the most, and they benefit first. That's on display in Europe and America as well, but like in an exaggerated way in places like Venezuela and Turkey and Iran and Nigeria, etc. It's just, you need to be close to the hand that feeds. You know, you've got to be close to the money tap. So what you've seen is like basically the very definition of human rights violations, whether it be our ability to speak and connect and communicate with one another and transact with one another, our ability to have private property, our ability to be entrepreneurial, all of these things, our ability to be human rights activists are all limited by money. Like, the government or corporations can shut down our bank account and devalue our currency and freeze our payments. Those are human rights violations. So,
and with CBDC, they can even do more invasive stuff, like expiry dates on the money you got. And
yeah, I mean, central bank digital currencies are going to replace cash. Paper money is still a human rights tool. It gives us privacy. It gives us a way to like do business outside of the government. That's going to be removed, and we're going to head into this cashless society where you'll have money that's basically totally engineered by the government and is programmable, and essentially there'll be new blacklists, and there'll be, you know, incentive structures, and there'll be forced spending, and there'll be time expiration dates on money and wages, and there'll be negative interest rates to support whatever the government wants to pay for, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I mean, this is the threat, and Norway is going to be in the front because the Norwegian society is already very digitized when it comes to payments and money. relatively speaking, compared to world societies. So I think it's very timely. And at the end of the day, Bitcoin, because money is used as a weapon against people, like in the sense of a dictator freezing an activist bank account, that is why Bitcoin is a tool for human rights. So Bitcoin allows you to fight back. So wherever you are in the world, anywhere you are, it doesn't matter what your skin color is or gender or nationality or passport you hold or what level of wealth you hold, you can use this open source software on a phone or a computer, and you can participate in this non-discriminatory neutral monetary network where the same rules apply for everybody. Today, the same rules don't apply. We have dollars and crowns, and people get screwed over at different rates. Like Americans tend to be the most privileged. Norwegians are pretty privileged, but like the first time I went to Norway, a crown got me, was basically like 5 crowns to $1. Not anymore. I mean, I think it's like, what, 10 now? So you guys have had a 50% currency devaluation against the dollar in the last decade. That's insane. And now think about Turkey. They're having 50% inflation per, in some cases per month in some of these countries.
Yeah.
So I mean, look at Lebanon. Lebanon is about to have a 93% devaluation this year. And they're going to basically steal all the dollars that are in deposits in banks and replace them with this like fake currency. So essentially, like, Bitcoin is how people are fighting back. There are tens of millions of people in authoritarian societies and in emerging market countries turning to Bitcoin as a way out of a broken financial system, whether it's to send money to family abroad, to keep a business or nonprofit or activist group going, to do commerce, to just save for the future, to continue to do their work where they would otherwise be deplatformed. There's just a million different reasons why people are using Bitcoin around the world. And it is a powerful human rights tool today, very powerful.
I'm thinking of like 3 types of inflation that, like you got inflation in nations that are doubling and tripling, the value decrease of its money. And you got the like reserve currency inflation, like the dollar inflation, and you got the asset inflation. What are your thoughts on inflation, and do you see a hyperinflation coming in near future on the reserve currencies?
Look, so it's pretty, most people, like, I would hope, acknowledge how devastating high inflation is for emerging market countries and authoritarian countries. It's a story as old as time, as old as human civilization. We've had currency debasement. I mean, I would encourage people to go look at the history of ancient Rome and see how basically the decline of the empire tracked with the currency debasement over time. And then just so many stories of different empires. I mean, going back to 1,000 years ago in medieval China, they started printing money with paper and led to hyperinflation. And you could go to almost every part of the world and find these stories. I mean, the Congo 40 years ago, Cuba today. I mean, everybody knows about Venezuela and Zimbabwe, but I mean, Russia in the 90s. I mean, like America in the Continental Revolution. I mean, you can go to any country in the world. Europe had the record for most hyperinflation in the world. Wasn't in Africa or Latin America. It was in Hungary during the Cold War. So every country has had one of these. I mean, we all know about Weimar Germany. What about Nazi Germany? There's so many different episodes of the government mismanaging the economy or exploiting it and causing like aggressive, extreme inflation. I mean, what is hyperinflation? I mean, some economists have like some stats or whatever. They say it has to be X or Y. Let's just settle on extreme inflation. Okay, so that would be like, I don't know, let's say anything above 15 or 20%, generally speaking, with regard to CP, prices of goods, right? That is a common occurrence in today's world. More people suffer under double-digit inflation than the number of people who lack access to toilets or clean drinking water. And yet there is no UN group to tackle this. There's no UN body to tackle extreme inflation. There is no like alphabet soup organization out there to help. There is no, because those organizations are the ones often inflicting the inflation. You look at the IMF and the World Bank, the IMF has been the one often to force inflation upon countries. Like if you look at French West Africa as an example. So, it's a great unspoken crime that's being committed. And there hasn't really been a good way for people to fight back. Gold was completely demonetized from the international system by my government, basically over the last 100 years. People ended up resorting to, as you mentioned, asset inflation, like because the money was so bad, they started buying houses and stocks and things like that, which are now overinflated versus their actual value of what they provide to society. And the dollar has become a treasured asset for people in a lot of these countries around the world, even though it even inflates, 7% last year, just because it inflates the slowest. It's like, it's a game of like, how do I get poor the least slowly? I mean, essentially, and the 1% has been able to ruthlessly exploit this. I mean, the 1% in America. I mean, Bitcoin is not a redistributionary phenomenon. It's not going to solve equality of outcome. However, what it does solve is monetary equality, and that means we don't have. Since the early 90s, the 1% in America, their wealth has gone from 24% of all the wealth to a third, to 33% or so. So the 1% has basically upgraded their holdings of the wealth in America from a quarter to a third as a result of easy monetary policy and asset inflation. So wherever you've been in the world, this has been a problem.
Yeah, and the general public hasn't been part of that asset inflation by large.
Well, look, some have, like about half of Americans own stocks, right? But like half of them don't, so it depends on where you are in that slice. But like looking at the middle of American society, like the middle 20%, their wages and livelihood has essentially been flat since like the 80s, okay, in real terms. Whereas the top 10%, the top 1% have been killing it. Like you're in technology, finance, banking, like real estate, you've been crushing it in the last 20 years. You're a farmer or you're like in manufacturing. It's been a really hard time. So it really depends on what your place is in society. Like where are you in and it's been not great for most people. It's been really great for some people. And that's a result of financial privilege, again, whether it be within your own society or globally speaking. And now we have the opportunity to have this asset or this money that has equal rules for everybody and is open to anyone, and no one can be shut out of it. And a billionaire and a refugee are the same, like in the eyes of the protocol. Like the billionaire, of course, has more Bitcoin, but the billionaire can't stop the refugee from using Bitcoin. Billionaire can't steal any money. Billionaire cannot call the CEO of Bitcoin and like change the rules to favor them. No. This is, I mean, this is what happens. This is what happens. Absolutely. But like, this is what happens in fiat currency. Like the billionaires can call the government and like push to be saved. I mean, this is why Bitcoin was created. If you look at the Genesis block, I mean, Satoshi was not creating Bitcoin because of a privacy concern or surveillance concern, although that is part of the cypherpunk story. It was because of bailouts. Like he, she, whoever they were, thought it was unfair that the average person pay for the mistakes of the corporate sector. That's really at the heart of what Bitcoin is. So really, at the end of the day, it's all about money. And that has just been such an untold story in the human rights field. And we're excited to bring those things together and help clarify that for people.
Dude, and you're doing a really good job with your paper on the petrodollar as well.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, look, the petrodollar is a fascinating topic that's not very discussed, and it just came up today. In fact, Christine Lagarde, the head of the ECB, was being interviewed by reporters, and a reporter asked her, "What is the consequence of for inflation in Europe that our oil is priced in dollars?" It's a good question. The answer is oil will be more expensive and drive more inflation in Europe because it's priced in dollars for Europeans. Why should Europeans have to be? Europeans should be able to trade with an oil producing country in whatever currency they want. But the United States came up with this system, which was originally enforced by force and now kind of survives like as a kind of residual effect, like there's so many network effects that it's so hard to dethrone. But at the beginning, it was absolutely a creature of, it was a non-market creation. And I detail this in I have sort of a 2-part essay series that explores dollar hegemony. One is the uncovering the hidden costs of the petrodollar, and the other one is the end of super imperialism. And both of them, I talk about this phenomenon. But yeah, I mean, the dollar being like 4% of the world's population controlling money for the whole world is a crazy story. Like that's not, that wasn't necessarily the way it was going to shake out. That was done very carefully. And it's an interesting history, and I think people would learn from it. I mean, look, I'm an American. I've benefited tremendously from this system, but I think it's unfair. And it's, Jack Dorsey said this the other day when he was interviewed by Michael Saylor. He said, it's just not fair that like someone in Nigeria, their lives are basically dictated financially by what somebody in Washington says, or somebody in New York says. It's not fair. So, we have a new system.
When you're printing dollars in the States, like
they don't care about you. Like Nixon was famous for saying, Nixon has a quote. I quoted this in my paper when people were like, well, aren't you concerned about what's going to happen with dollar devaluation? Nixon said, I don't give a shit about the lira. Somebody was asking about Italy, one of our trading partners. He literally said, I don't give a shit about the lira. So that's, I mean, we, as Americans, we got other countries to pay for our wars over the years by buying our debt. We wrecked Japan when they became too much of a threat to us through creating an asset bubble. Anyone should watch Princes of the Yen to learn more about that. It's shocking. We forced Germany to pay for our stuff and to pay for our invasion of Vietnam unwillingly. We forced Japan to pay for our stuff. We forced the Saudis and the OPEC people to pay for our stuff. And then China paid for our stuff. And guess what? They're not paying for our stuff anymore. Foreigners are not buying nearly as many treasuries as they used to buy. And that ended about 8 years ago. And now my government is the majority buyer of its own debt. So we have like major central planning when it comes to the debt markets in America. We have the Fed, the Central Bank of America, aggressively intervening in not just the short term, but the long-term bond markets. So the price of American debt and our ability to borrow to do things like fight forever wars is kept low by government intervention in the bond market. And who pays those costs? The population does, in terms of over time currency devaluation. And the interest is borne by future generations. Like these invasions of Asia and Iraq and Afghanistan, we've already paid $1 trillion on interest alone from the money we borrowed to pay for those wars. That's insane. That $1 trillion could have been spent so many other ways to help our own country. And these credit card wars are a problem. War used to be something that was part of society. Like people used to be involved and war was popular. Like if you look at opinion polling, I mean, war was financed by taxes and by war bonds. Like the population knew what was going on. Today, we don't have war taxes or war bonds. It's all borrowing, and it's all done through this like intricate system that my next essay will actually tackle this kind of the cost of war thing. But like basically the government like borrows money from the private sector without telling them what it's going to be for, and then buys a bunch of weapons, and then on the other end, it buys back the security that it just sold to the private sector, and keeps the price of borrowing low. It's not sustainable forever. And, I don't know exactly how the Norwegian economy works, but everything's sort of downstream from the American economy, right? Like certainly the Bank of England and the ECB work in a similar way. Like when Britain joined us to invade Iraq, Tony Blair, I don't think they raised taxes or did war bonds. Like, I mean, I'll look into it, but no, they borrowed to do that, right? So, like generally speaking, when a country it borrows too much, its currency starts to devalue. The exception would be Japan, but I think there's a good explanation for like Japan has, how Japan has a higher debt to GDP ratio, 2x the Americas, and there's no price inflation. Right.
And they also got this elderly wave, we call it.
Well, that's what I'm getting at. So one partial way of explaining the mystery of Japan is the fact that if you think about an economy as an organism, Japan's is dying. like the country is shrinking. Like that's a powerful deflationary force. Like basically the workforce is shrinking. So the economy is shrinking over time. So they can try to do a lot of inflationary activity, but it's hard to mask the shrinking of an economy. So that to me helps explain Japan. But everywhere else, I mean, eventually you get inflation, or you get asset inflation. I mean, and even in Japan, like it's so crazy. The government owns half the stock market. The government owns 70% of the government bonds. So those markets in Japan are completely manipulated. Like if there was no government buying of stocks and bonds, the Japanese stock market wouldn't be worth much. I mean, it's so crazy. And that's the case with America too. Like our monetary policy has been pumping up these stocks in a non-free market way. Like there is no way the stock market would be where it is today without government intervention. And I know that our government doesn't actively buy stocks, but what it does is it actively buys what are considered the savings mechanisms of Wall Street, which are the treasuries. And it takes them off the market and brings their yield down. And therefore it pushes everybody out on the risk curve. So they're going out and investing in CLOs and equities and all this other stuff. And it forces like pension funds and countries like yours, sovereign wealth funds, to get more risky. Because if we're taking the safe asset that used to deliver 5% a year, and we're bringing those interest rates down to like 1% or 0% to pay for our wars and stuff, then the private sector is going to have to look for other options, and they're going to get much more risky. And that describes the current predicament we're in. It's really crazy. So no matter where you are, whether you're American, Norwegian, or from Zimbabwe, like money is a human rights issue, and it matters. I mean, especially as we go into this fully electronic age where, money is all digital essentially, and we have surveillance capitalism and Big Brother. So it doesn't matter whether you're left wing or right wing, like you have concerns either way. Like either you're concerned about big tech or big government, right? And it's like, or both, like me. But at the end of the day, like most money that we use today is not even, I mean, you have money, like base money, right? You have cash, which is a liability of the central bank, right? Paper money, metal money, and then you have bank reserves, which are a liability of the central bank, which are held by big banks, right? And then you have like the money that most people are accustomed with, which is essentially like what we'll say, commercial money, which is loans that banks create money. Most of the money in money that we properly understood is created by private actors, not by the government, by banks. They extend loans and create deposits, etc. But that's not even the money that most people use day to day. Most people are using a subsidiary of that in fintech companies. So most people are just using like Apple Pay or Alipay or Visa or whatever, and we're just interacting on like private ledgers of companies that have bank accounts, that have accounts with the Fed or whatever, with the central bank. So we're like way down this like hierarchy of money, and they just know so much about us. And every time you make a transaction with a credit card, you're selling all this stuff to the data markets. Your last transaction, your potential next transaction. We're opening ourselves up to social engineering. So the ability for us to create an online economy where we can use, for example, the Lightning Network to build an economy that is similar to the old economy, where when I bought something, the merchant doesn't know my name or my address or my phone number or anything about me. They just know that I paid. That's totally fine. The idea that like that's dangerous is absurd. That's like the way the world used to work. So I refuse to accept this notion that like every transaction the government needs to know. It's a KYC AML regime. It's like totally NGMI. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's where we are.
So we got 5 minutes left before you got to shoot off. Can we do some rapid questions to wrap it up?
Yeah, let's do it.
Still got some questions we would like to cover. So really rapid. How is Bitcoin helping people in emerging economies today?
Well, number one is digital gold. It acts as a hedge against currency devaluation.
Yeah,
people might forget if you have access to stocks and real estate and you're middle class or upper middle class in Norway or something. But I mean, remember, Bitcoin is up 4x in the last 18 months, and it's up 40x over the last 5 years. And that's been a return available to literally anyone in the world with a smartphone. And a lot of people took advantage, and a lot of people have benefited massively in places like Cuba, Nigeria, from that insane rise in value, whereas their currencies have gone the other way.
Have you met anybody that has that story?
Tons of people. I've interviewed them. I've written about them. But like that everywhere from Cuba to Venezuela to Nigeria to Sudan. And it's digital gold and it's digital cash. It's also allowed people to seamlessly do commerce or remittances around the world outside of the banking system. So in emerging markets, those are really the two big use cases right now.
There's this meme, came for the quick gains, stayed for the sound money. I guess we can reverse that when it comes to like people with who experience hyperinflation, that a lot of them come for the sound money, and then they get the quick gains.
Yeah, I mean, look, they're one and the same. I mean, look, Bitcoin is awesome for a lot of reasons, but ultimately the reason why it works is because it's sound money. It's predictable. It's known. There's no secrets. Like, we all know how it's going to work for like the next 100 years. That's at the root of everything that makes it possible. There are a million reasons to be interested in Bitcoin, including from what I touched on today, ranging from fighting surveillance to doing better global commerce and all kinds of things. But at the end of the day, its value proposition and its foundation comes from its monetary policy, which is different from fiat.
Dude, awesome. So glad to have you on, Alex. It was a pure joy and a pure a shower of knowledge. It was great.
Well, I hope you guys can come and do some live shows at the Freedom Forum in May. That would be great.
We're up for it if you want us. We
absolutely. We'll get you guys media passes. We'll hook you up.
Dude, that'd be great.
Awesome.
That'd be great. All right. Thanks a lot for coming, Alex. Have a good one.
Thanks for having me on.